are back to the book On the Way to the Light from the Spirit Emmanuel through the psychography of Francisco Xavier. A reminder that our classes are recorded and posted on our YouTube page as GNY. So if you don't like your name or your face to show, please remove yourself, either for your name or your altogether. This book, let me share here. This book, On the Way to the Light, is, as I mentioned, psychographed by the Spirit Emmanuel, by Francisco Xavier, and it's the story of humanity from the spiritual point of view, according to Emmanuel. And it's always very important to reinforce that this is what Emmanuel from the spiritual world sees as the evolution of humanity. We are not going to try to say that everything depicted here matches with what historians studied and found, because of course, as we are back in the spiritual world, we have a different vision, and I'm sure Emmanuel has some knowledge and understanding that is different from what scholars and historians find. But as always, we are going to try to bring a little bit of history together with what Emmanuel brings here, because he goes back and forth between times, and to put in historical perspective, and for us to better understand, according to historians, what was going on at the time. It's important for us to go through the history books a little bit to understand. So we covered the Crusades. We covered last month the Crusades, the Black Plague, the medieval times, and we stopped in the end of it, which is the beginning of a new era for humanity that is called the Renaissance, which is a movement that started, some say in the 15th and 16th century, some say started early, by the end of the 1300s, beginning of 1400s. It is said that it started with Dante Alighieri works by the beginning of the 1400s, but some people say that it started later. It's really not. The dates are not important. The movement in itself, it's more important. Okay, so I'm going to ask Paco. You're there. You want to read today, Paco? How's your sound?
Yeah, let's hope I have a good connection, because you know how it is that sometimes it gets disjointed.
Yeah,
okay,
your,
but
your
we'll try.
sound
Okay.
is not very. It's not very. Sound is not very high, so I don't know if you.
I don't know. Sometimes because no, here also there's not connection much in my. Let's start the Renaissance. At that time, there was a true renaissance in the intellectual life of the most evolved peoples of the European world. The university was composed of 4 colleges: theology, medicine, law, and the arts, bringing together thousands of bringing together thousands of the education-hungry minds who would become the great elements of preparing for the future. The English Franciscan Roger Bacon, famous for his studies and initiatives, was one of the culminating points of this spiritual rebirth. The church, however, prohibited examination and free opinion, thereby harming this evolutionary boom, especially in the case of medicine, which, disregarding the close observation of all the facts, surrendered to magic causing serious harm to society, favored by the need for opulent displays of outward expressions of religion and by individual wealth. Architecture was the most cultivated of all the arts, given the many grand buildings in vogue at the time. Under the indirect influence of the spirit guides of various groupings of peoples, the languages of each country consolidated to form the great literary traditions of each region.
Okay, so when we talk about the when we talk about the Renaissance, it's important to understand that we're talking about a period of European history that is really marks the transition between the Middle Ages and modernity. So it covers mostly the 15th and 16th century, but really we can talk about from the 14th century to the end of the 17th century, as sometimes it's called the Long Renaissance. And why it happened? Well, with the Black Plague that caused the end of the feudal system, we had a profound change in how Europe was divided, and you start to see countries being formed. You have the origins of France, of England, of German, not really Italy. Italy was a series of small city-states, as they were called. City-states at that time, which is, you have Venice, Milan, Bologna, and you had, of course, the Papal State, which was surrounding Rome, and especially, and above all, you have Florence, which is really considered the beginning of Renaissance, because there is where you have the most advanced minds in terms of arts. You have the so-called polymaths. Polymaths is a term that defines an individual whose knowledge covers a substantial number of subjects, meaning they are not only focused on one thing. They are mathematicians, physicians, astronomers. The greatest example that we have is Leonardo da Vinci, of course, being the most well-known polymath of Renaissance, but also Michelangelo with his art is considered one of the greatest individuals of Renaissance. So Renaissance, as Emmanuel says here, it covers from theology, covers theology, medicine, law, and the arts, but mostly we talk about it in terms of arts and architecture. Because as Emmanuel describes here, in medicine, the progress was pretty much controlled by the church. And of course, theology, we are going to discuss a little bit later. We have the beginning of Protestantism that we're going to see. And so with this, the oppression of the existing church, the Roman church, increased also. So why Renaissance and what happened there? We see, and we are going to see in the next chapter, in the next item, why we suddenly had a movement of progress and of changes in these arts and architecture and all, because basically is the reincarnation of the ancient peoples of the other civilizations of Earth that are reborn in Europe and brings their knowledge. Because again, bringing this to Spiritism, we know that our intellectual progress is always we brought with us whatever is necessary for us to continue progressing. Our moral progress is always with us. Our intellectual progress, sometimes we bring, sometimes it's blocked, is because we cannot or shouldn't use in our incarnation. But a lot of this reincarnations brings the advancement in intellectual evolution that is brought to these regions. But we are going to talk about this in the next items. So when we talk about Renaissance, the church was not against it at all. On the contrary, there, especially in the arts, paintings, and the paintings of the time are pretty much religious paintings, and are paintings ordered by the church. So you see the Sistine Chapel painted by Michelangelo in the Vatican, one of the most beautiful works of art from the Renaissance that is still there today, was ordered by the Vatican, was ordered by the church. The paintings by the most famous painters of the Renaissance, their motives are religious, but they are different from previous paintings because they bring the perspective for the first time. Before, you had paintings that were pretty much flat, paintings before Renaissance. And Renaissance, the new painters, they bring this notion of of perspective that gives a whole new beauty to the paintings of that time. And of course, the sculptures that you see at that time, from David of Michelangelo, that is a wonderful sculpture, to other sculptures by Michelangelo. So, you know, the works of art were mostly sponsored by dominant families. The Medici family was one of the most famous ones. A lot of popes come from the family, and a lot of the sponsors of the art sponsored at that time were paid by the Medicis. Okay, so basically you had this Renaissance starting in Italy and the rest of Europe. You see the mention of Francis Bacon here. Francis Bacon was an English philosopher and statesman that served as Attorney General and was a Lord Chancellor in England. He's the father of empiricism, which is a theory that states that knowledge comes only from sensory experience, right? So, but he started a lot of scientific knowledge progress, and he was the one that argued that he started to use reason as a way of progressing, of discussing theories. He's considered one of the proponents of inductive reason, which is a reason that premises are viewed as supplying some evidence, but not full assurance for the truth of conclusion. It's opposed to the reasoning, later reasoning, which is the deductive reasoning, yes, which indicates that you have to have all the facts to reach a conclusion. You cannot reach a conclusion if you don't have all the facts. Inductive reason, you have some facts and you reach a conclusion based on some evidence, but not all evidence. So Francis Bacon was a very important member of the nobility in England that helped he was a reformer. He was a lot of laws come from him, and a very important figure, and that's why Emmanuel specifically mentions here Now, when Emmanuel talks about medicine here, that he says that the medicine at that time focused a lot on magic. We have to understand that the beginnings of medicine, they didn't really have much knowledge. It was more of a trial and error, which, you know, nowadays the trial and error that still exists is done mostly either on animals or if not even on animals. But at that time was pretty much done on human beings. So you treat human beings, you tried on them, see if it worked, and you continue learning from it. And if that caused death of some of them, that's part of the evolution of medicine. And that's why in the end, people started using magic also as basis of being of searching for healing for their diseases. Because when you are sick and you cannot find a cure, you look for any answer. And again, we continue to be like that. When we are sick and medicine cannot find a cure, we look for any other options that we have available to try to find a cure. So at that time, that medicine was much less advanced and much less knowledgeable. You can imagine that magic played an important role. But Emmanuel finishes here talking about the languages of each country, because we know at that time Latin was the most common word, international language used, that was used in Rome. But you have the local languages consolidating. So you have French deriving from Latin, you have Spanish and Portuguese deriving from Latin and Roman also, and then you have the German and English that they're being developed at that time and solidifying at that time, and that's what Emmanuel says about the language of each country. You're going to see a little bit on the next chapter, some of what happens on each region of Europe. Okay. Any comments, questions here on the Renaissance? Nope. Okay. Let's go to the transmigration of people. Paco, you are mute because you were making a lot of noise. You opened another
Okay.
device here.
Now, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make a comment, and it may show my bias. Okay, so I'm telling you I'm telling you in advance. But it seems to me it says here the church prohibited. Okay, it was kind of retrograde in its approach, and this beautiful. I wonder if those beautiful masterpieces in art and architecture was a way of the church manifesting grandiosity. I'm sorry, but that's sometimes my take on it, you know. And I'm telling you, it's also my bias, okay, against church. I'm not denying that I may be kind of prejudiced, you know, but it's I wonder because
yeah, to put in perspective, the church was the dominant institution of the time. The lives of everybody was pretty much controlled by the church. We're coming from medieval ages where you were completely controlled by the church. And the Renaissance, there is a beginning of searching from some sort of independence from the church. But as we know, until today, nobody likes to lose power. And the church, of course, was trying to control as much as they could and not allow their power to weaken. So when you cannot impose, you need to allow some sort of escape valves, right? So I believe, and again, this is me, I believe one escape valve that the church found at that time was through arts, because they could control with the money the art that was
Exactly.
produced,
Yeah. Oh,
and censor
yeah.
also the art that they didn't like. So all this religious art that was produced was pretty much controlled by the church, but that doesn't prevent it from us to recognizing the beauty of it, because it was a
Oh no,
beautiful,
no.
art that you go to the Sistine Chapel. You don't need to agree with what's depicted there or what order it, but you cannot reject the beauty of the works of Michelangelo and all the others, the painters of the Renaissance. So yes, the church was pretty much in control and trying to prevent any deviations from their teachings as much as they could. So a way to do that was really to, let's say, sponsor the arts so they could control it. And for the artists of that time, it was really, if you wanted to make a living out of arts, you had to subject yourself to the church, because otherwise you wouldn't have the sponsors. And the church here, I'm talking about the families also that belong to the church, because the Medicis, they were a family that was not the church, but most of its members ended up being popes or priests, and a lot of other
Yeah.
scandalous happenings at that time. You just have to look up, for those that are curious. You can watch the series The Medicis in Netflix, and you'll see, of course, a lot of it is fiction, and you have to separate fiction from truth. But it tells a lot about how life was at that time and the control that the powerful families had at that time. Which, if you look nowadays, we just have more people, but powerful families still control a lot of things. Let's say, not to go into much details. So yes, you're right. Always the hand of the church, a heavy hand of the church, and a lot of influence from the church. But of course, when you start opening valves of escape, you start finding people that um, will end up with their own ideas, fighting against the domination of the oppressors. And then you see the beginning of the reforms, the Protestantism that we were going to study a little bit later here today, still today. That was the fight against the religious power and the impositions of the religious power of the church. Okay. Anyone else?
I was thinking of the answer of Erastus, one of the discussion that I saw last week in the study of visual manifestations, in which Kardec asked why would the more evolved the spirits allow less evolved spirits to perform apparitions with bad intentions, and the answer was the spirit's intention may be evil, but the results may be good. I think that's a clear case with the relationship of the church at the time and the arts. Church may not have the most noble of the intentions. Maybe you're right,
Yeah.
press, but the results was
Yeah.
excellent. You can't deny their wonderful works in the
Of
arts,
course. Yeah.
in bar. The whole Johann Sebastian bar was religious music. Everything was a representation of their faith. And even if the church may or may not be corrupt, you can tell that those artists, they were not corrupted. They have a sincere faith to be and express that faith in the arts. So the intention may not be great, but the results was excellent.
Yeah. Yes.
No. I agree. I agree definitely.
Yeah, Yeah, when we
Yeah.
look at history of human
Yo,
evolution,
I guess I have to say, yo, I got my issues. My issues with church.
yeah, you're cutting Paco, so it's kind of we're having problem with your
Yeah.
sound.
No, it's just you have
Um,
just one system open. With two systems open, you have echo and problems.
yeah. So Ricardo posted on the chat a documentary about the Medici that he says that it's much better without all the drama or the fiction. So it's a documentary, and the link is there on the chat if anyone wants to know a little bit more.
I feel like the Netflix series, they watched this documentary and then they embellished on this documentary. And it's really good. It narrates, it talks you to the popes, to the family, how they become. It's really interesting.
Good.
Yeah, it's such an
Wow,
important
very good.
family. Yeah, it's such an important family that if you are curious about the time, it's important to watch it. Thank you, Ricardo.
That was okay.
All right. So let's see now. Let's bring Spiritism to history a little bit. This is a very important part here: the transmigration of peoples. Paco, I don't know. You're cutting a little bit, so I don't know if. Yeah, I will see if we can hear you. Otherwise, I'm going to ask someone else to read.
Let me see if I sit somewhere else. Let me see, because I'm hearing you disjointed too. Oh my God, this is not it.
Okay, Philip, read for us, please.
Transmigration of peoples. At this time, countless messengers under Jesus' guidance began the lengthy endeavor of bringing spirits together according to their tendencies and affinities in order to shape the nations of the future with their collective personality. Each one of these nationalities would be responsible for a specific mission in organizing future peoples according to the wise determinations of Christ, building the foundations for a new world after many disasters of human weakness. The foundations were laid for great countries such as England, which in 1258 implemented the Statutes of Oxford, limiting the powers of Henry III. In 1265, the House of Commons was established, where the burghers and the less favored classes had a say along with the House of Lords. Italy was preparing itself for its Latinizing mission. Germany took shape. The Iberian Peninsula became a huge workshop, and France took definitive steps towards knowledge and beauty. The activities of the spirit world provided human history with the perfect characterization of the collective soul of the peoples. Like individuals, whole collectives also return to the world via reincarnation. Thus, we find ancient Phoenicians in Spain and Portugal once again expressing their predilection for the sea. In ancient Lucia, which became the famous Paris of the West, we find the Athenian soul in its lofty philosophical and scientific investigations, opening clear pathways for the rights of peoples and individuals. A little farther along, we find in Persia the bellicose spirit of Sparta, whose deficient and misguided education led to the detestable spirit of pan-Germanism.
In today's Germany.
I can't read the first line.
We cross the channel and find in Great Britain the Roman aedileship.
With its education and prudence, resuming once again the lost reigns of the Roman Empire in order to benefit the souls that had for so many centuries waited for its protection and assistance.
Okay, so very important concepts of spiritism in this paragraph and this item. And here is where what you will find, what sometimes you hear in Spiritist lectures and Spiritism texts, the reincarnation of collectivities, as Emmanuel says here, where we find groups of people reincarnating together at specific places for advancement of these places. We studied before in this book when we talked about the exiles from Capella. Capella is a constellation where the ancient civilizations came from and established themselves in 4 different places on Earth, in Egypt, in the Tigris Euphrates River in what is today Iraq, in Europe, a little bit to Eastern Europe, and in the Indian subcontinent. And all these 4 civilizations were that came from Capella caused the evolution of the planet Earth. You see the evolution of the Egyptians, the Chinese, the Hinduism, and even the European a little bit. And we studied this in the beginning of the book. If you forgot or you missed, you can go back to the beginning of the book and study it. But these were collective reincarnations that came from Capella. Now, as we evolve and we see here the evolution of the planet, we know that we keep reincarnating basically in the same planet, because that's where our loved ones and our not so loved ones are, and we need to readjust around them. So from there, you see that it makes sense that you have collectivities of spirits that work together in different places to reincarnate together to continue this evolution. So here, specifically, Emmanuel talks about the Phoenicians that reincarnated in Spain and Portugal. Phoenicia was a region, an ancient region where we find today mostly what is Lebanon today, but a little bit of Syria and Israel, northern Palestine. There was a civilization that characterized for the developments of navigation. They were very good in commerce, and they would navigate throughout the Mediterranean Sea for their commerce. So their main contribution for humanity was in terms of navigation. And you see them reincarnating in Spain and Portugal right after the end of the domination of the Arabs. Sorry, the word was escaping. The Arabs dominated Spain and Portugal until the 14th, 15th century. And after that, you see the reincarnation of the Phoenicians there. And the Spain and Portugal basically were responsible for the great navigators of the time, the discoveries that happened in the 15th century of the Americas, the navigation to India, and all of this. So you see here the logic of the Phoenicians, that were an ancient civilization specialized in navigation, that developed navigation, reincarnating Portugal and Spain, and continue to use navigation now as a way to conquer the world. Then he talks about Lutetia, which is the region where Paris is today. So ancient Lutetia is where we find the Athenians. If you remember, when we studied the Greek civilization, Greece was divided in city-states also, and Athens was where the arts and the philosophy and all the humanist development happened. All the great figures, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they are all from Athens. So you see that as France becomes the soul, it becomes the focus on the development in terms of government systems, and that's why we ended up having Spiritism reborn in France in the 19th century, because it really was, Paris was the center of the world in the 19th century. And that's a consequence of the reincarnation of the former Athenians there with their philosophical and scientific investigations. We start, and we see there where it started, the pathways for the rights of people and individuals. Remember that the constitution of this country, the US, is based on the French Revolution that happened around the same time, and the ideas brought with the French Revolution of liberty, fraternity, and equality. We are going to study it a little bit later in this book, the deviations of it, of course, that we know, Napoleon and all the problems, but the ideas were there, and the evolution of the world at that time. A little bit before, Emmanuel talks about England, which is also very important, because in England was the first place to reign on a little bit on the absolutism of the kings. So in 1258, they started limiting the absolute powers of the king, of course, not completely, because we still see until the 19th century, the king had a lot of power. Only on the 20th century is that the king or queens of England lost their political powers and became only the head of state with a limited power. But by 1265, you had the House of Commons established. It was the first time ever in history that you see not the nobles represented, but the less favored classes. Of course, not the slaves of the slaves of foreigners, but the low classes, that not the nobles, they had the representation. And this exists until today in England, and actually nowadays is the main government institution of England, is the House of Commons. You still have the House of Lords, that some rules will go to the House of Lords. And basically the lower chamber and Senate was loosely based in the House of Commons and House of Lords, because you have two institutions that control the government. Of course, it's a little bit different how it works here and other places where you have republics. But in England, until today, you have the House of Commons and House of Lords that control the government. When I talk, and he mentions here who are the ones that reincarnated in England and eventually came to this country that we're going to see a little bit later, the Romans. The Roman Empire and the Romans, the civilization, the Roman civilizations were the ones that reincarnated both in England and here in the US. And as we mentioned many times, you just have to go to Washington to find yourself back into ancient Rome with the monuments and all the architecture of Washington that resembles a lot the Roman Empire. So there you see. And finally, he mentions here, and here we have to put into context and be very careful, because this book was written before the Second World War, when the Nazi movement was growing in Germany. And he talks here that we find who reincarnating in Germany, the Spartans. And if you remember, when we studied the Spartans, they were the warriors of ancient Greece. They were the ones that existed to go to war. They fought around with all those around them. They were very strict in terms of the population, the first ideas of a perfect race was started in Sparta. Sparta used to kill people, children that were born with defects. Sparta would incentivize the physical development of individuals and prepare from a very early age. Kids were, boys were removed from their parents and started training to be warriors. So you see the seeds of what we find in Germany in the beginning of with the Nazis and the pure race and things like that. So Emmanuel is here just already before the war talking about the detestable spirit of pan-Germanism in today's Germany, which is what ended up being the war and the Nazis. But the important thing here for us to remember is the collective reincarnations. So besides individual reincarnations, when we reincarnate amongst our families, we come again with our parents, with our siblings, with our cousins, with our friends. They are possibly people that we knew from previous incarnations and that are here either to help us or for us to readjust with them. Collectivities also come back to the world via reincarnation and work together again, always with the best of intentions according to the plan of the spiritual world. But because of our free will, we end up, because of our inferiority, we ended up deviating from the original path and creating problems for ourselves and for our collectivities. Again, another concept here that is important to remember is that we have collective karmas. We have individual karmas and we have collective karmas. So a group of people responsible, let's say, for the massacre of a civilization, they create a collective karma for themselves. They have to, many times they will go and readjust collectively. So when we see something like the tsunami that kills 300,000 people or 200,000 people, not all individuals there, but a lot of the individuals there for sure were together in this tragic end for a collective karma. This is what we learned from Spiritism. What was the karma? Why they were together? Who were they? That's not what's important, and that's not what we should focus ourselves, because we don't have this information. And again, it's too recent for us to understand better. But what we can say is that is most likely the result of a collective karma. Like other things, there is a famous story that by the end of in 1950 something, there was a fire in a circus in Brazil that killed 200 or 300 people, and someone asked Chico Xavier why this would happen to these 200, 300 people that died in the fire of this circus. And he said they were all paying a collective karma that they got from the times of the Roman empires, when they were part of the burning of responsible for burning of Rome at the time of Nero. So they pay together eventually as a collective karma in dying by fire in a circus 2,000 years later. So you can imagine that we have to readjust for our collective karmas eventually, one way or another. We can evolve, always remember, we can evolve through love or through pain. So not all those responsible for the fire had to die by the fire, because through love they can evolve and overcome their karma and overcome their necessity of violent deaths and alleviate their karma with a more less difficult discarnation, let's say. But again, this is part of our evolution as individual spirits. We have to face individual karmas and collective karmas. Okay? Comments, questions here, because this is a very interesting subject. This is really where we bring spiritism into the discussion here when we talk about reincarnation.
Yeah, I think here we see we could question this reincarnation of collective group of spirits in one common geographical location. Is it an orchestration of the divine, the superior spirituality, or is that simply law of affinity, that spirits will join together according to their intentions, to their common development, and will form communities based on that affinity? And I think this shows that it's likely the second, that is affinity that brings us together. And this affinity is for the good that we produce together, but also for our responsibility to repair the mistakes of the past together.
Yes. Yeah. Again, when we talk about, we have to understand in terms of numbers, right? We're not going to say that all Athenians reincarnated there in France. We don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, we don't. We're not going to say that Socrates or Aristotle or Plato reincarnated there. But the disciples, you will have always more evolved spirits reincarnating amongst less evolved spirits as a collectivity to help and direct those. But evolution is personal. Our moral and intellectual evolution is individual on each one of us. So a lot of them cannot come back because they haven't reached the level needed for that type of group incarnating at that time. And a lot of them reincarnated, evolved faster and don't need to specifically reincarnate there because they have other works to do. So, but again, as a collectivity, our evolution is pretty much uniform. You know, there are different evolutions individually, but it's not that we evolve in a completely different speeds as a group, because otherwise, you know, you would have to have changes in transmigration to other worlds, because you have a lot of spirits evolving too fast for this world, or a lot of spirits not evolving too fast for this world and having to go to other worlds. So most of us evolve in a more or less similar way. So we are all together, and that's where we see the evolution of this planet. And as we move into a world of regeneration that we are now moving, we know that some individuals won't be able to stay here on Earth, like the exiles from Capella that had to reincarnate on a much inferior planet like Earth, because they couldn't continue in Capella because of their lack of moral evolvement, not intellectual, moral. And the same thing is happening on Earth as we speak. A lot of spirits that are not evolving in the same way as the majority here on Earth. Remember, we are around 30 billion people here in this planet, amongst incarnates and discarnates. So it's a lot of spirits. But if you consider, I have no idea of number, and I'm not going to guess the number of spirits that are not going to reincarnate on Earth in their next incarnation, because they have to go to a less evolved place. But you know, whatever number you choose, 500 million, 1 billion, 5 billion, it's a significant number of spirits that will go to a less evolved world and will help this less evolved world advance. Again, we never lose anything that we have achieved morally and intellectually, but our knowledge that we bring is according to where we reincarnate and according to our needs on each incarnation. This is on the intellectual side of it, right? The moral side, it's always with us. Okay?
Y'all, may I ask a question? Because
Sure, Paco, go ahead.
okay, I switched devices, even though the phone is not that great in terms of reading, though. But okay, you're saying that some spirits will have to reincarnate in lesser worlds. I mean, let's do this.
Less evolved worlds, yes.
Less okay. Yeah, I like that better. Less evolved. But are we supposed to always move forward, or is it then that if we're moving forward?
Yeah,
is
that's always the big question, and that's what sometimes is hard to understand. We individuals are always moving forward. We never regress.
exactly.
So,
That's that I remember. That's okay.
yes, the moral evolution that you achieve stays with you. The intellectual evolution that you achieve stays with you as eternal spirit. You may not bring to an incarnation because of the needs of the incarnation. Now, the fact that you're advancing always does not necessarily match to the world in which you are incarnated.
Got it.
If the world evolves faster, because worlds are evolving also. If the world evolves faster than you, and the world means the collectivity, right?
Yeah, no.
You
Well,
can
explain.
you can no longer incarnate there. So it's not that you are regressing. You're just
No.
going to a place where your mental vibration is more
Exactly.
connected.
Very
You're not
well.
losing anything.
Very well.
Well,
Very well, George. You said that the pace of the dimension is faster than my own pace.
yes.
So I have to got it. The pace is okay. I got it. Thank you.
So it's not a punishment. And again, we need to move away from the concept of punishment. It's your own choice. You remember, I always talk about the example of, you have a street with a bar and a church. You choose where you want to go. You want to go to the bar or the church. It's your choice. The world, more evolved world is, let's say, a church, a more evolved spiritual place. And you don't like it. You don't feel comfortable there. It doesn't fit with your vibration. So you go to a less evolved world that it makes you more comfortable in terms of vibration. And of course, this less evolved world will have its own struggles. And then when you go there, you are more advanced intellectually than them. Probably not much morally, but definitely intellectually. So you are going to bring them intellectual advancements. And you clearly see the Egypt civilization as the best example, right? Suddenly, out of nowhere, you start having the pyramids and all the advancements of the knowledge that the Egyptians had, the writings and all the other conquests of the Egyptian civilization, the pharaohs and all the progress the pharaohs bring and that civilization. And how did it come out of nowhere? It didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a more advanced intellectually civilization of spirits that reincarnated there, and helped this advancement. And here we're talking about generations, right? We have to be careful. We're not talking about one incarnation. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of years you have to put together. That's how you look at the evolution of civilization. So when you are going back to reincarnate, you leave Earth and you are reincarnating in planet A that is less evolved than Earth, you are going to stay there for hundreds of incarnations. And with that, you bring the evolution. Now, Emmanuel says in this book that all those that reincarnated in Egypt from Capella evolved morally enough to go back to Capella and leave Earth behind. So you can do that also, right? You evolve morally more than the planet you are, and you move either back to your original one or to a different planet. So, and this also happens on Earth. We have spirits that are evolving faster than Earth and have an opportunity to incarnate in a more evolved world. And if you remember the book Renunciation by Emmanuel, he talks about Alcyone that was already living in a more evolved world and decides to reincarnate on Earth to help a loved one that stayed behind that she wanted to help. So let's not, we talk always about those that are leaving Earth for more inferior planets, but there are those leaving Earth for a more evolved planet, for their own evolution, spiritual evolution. Okay. Okay. Any other questions, comments here? This is, I think that this item is a very, in terms of spiritism, not in terms of history, but in terms of spiritism, is one of the most important for us to understand and put into perspective our evolution as humankind and the collective reincarnations that happen in Europe. And one thing that I think is important to mention, this book is very European-centric, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about the evolution in Europe a lot. We don't talk much about the other civilizations in the world. And if you ask why is that, you have to remember that Emmanuel, in his previous incarnations from the Roman times as Publius Lentulus and the other reincarnations that we see in the books that 2000 years ago and 50 years later, and Renunciation and Hail Christ that covers 4 of his reincarnations, they are all in Europe. And we know that the one reincarnation before being Emmanuel, also in the mid at that time that he's describing here, was as a Jesuit monk in Brazil, one of the founders of the city of São Paulo called Manuel da Nóbrega. It's an incarnation of Emmanuel. So, and because Christianity is developing mostly in Europe at that time, and we are talking about Christianity here basically, with all the problems that Christianity brought, but being Spiritist, a doctrine that follows the teachings of Jesus, we focus a lot on the developments of Christianity that continues the work of Christ, of Jesus, and that's why this book talks a lot about Europe and the evolution of Europe, because we talk about the evolution of Christianity. But it's not to minimize the other civilizations, especially the Eastern civilizations in China and India and Japan that had their own, and India, that had their own histories. And it's studied a little bit in the beginning of the book, and we talk a little bit about it. But at this time, at the time of the Renaissance, really is when Europe starts to dominate the world and starts to conduct the evolution of the world with the discoveries and with everything that happens. One thing that is important here that I forgot to mention, one of the reasons of Renaissance was also the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. With the fall of Constantinople in 1453, a lot of what was stored and in possession of the Roman Empire in Constantinople was brought back to Europe and brought back to the Western Europe and helped to develop Renaissance there. So Renaissance also coincides with the fall of Constantinople that happened in 1453. Okay. Any other comments, questions here? Okay, so that's the end of the medieval era. Philip, please.
From the invisible realm throughout all time, devoted spirits have followed humankind in its days of martyrdom and glorification, always struggling for the peace and good of all people. In closing, we would mention the noble figure of Joan of Arc, who fulfilled her lofty mission by holding to the principles of justice and fraternity, and the dolorous wars that signaled the end of the medieval era. With the frightful conquests of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, and with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, which would remain for good under the power of the Turks, the era ended once and for all. A new era emerged for humankind with the ongoing assistance of Christ, whose merciful eyes follow human evolution from the arcanes of the infinite.
So a little bit of what I mentioned here, the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when Genghis Khan and Tamerlane were conquerors, mostly associated with barbarians. Genghis Khan was Mongol. And that's considered the end of the medieval era. What we have to really talk a little bit about here is Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc, which was a very important, is a heroine in France for her role during the 100 Years' War. And she was canonized as a Catholic saint. And why it's important, Jeanne d'Arc in French, or Joan of Arc in English. Why it is important? Because when we talk about mediumship, which is one of the most important aspects of Spiritism, we cannot forget about Joan of Arc, because it was through mediumship that she went to have her role into the wars and to fight into the wars. She had these visions when she was very young, and these visions that she had told her that she had to go and free France. This was very young. She was a teenager when she had the visions, and she went to tell the king that she had to help free France from the domain of the English. At that time, the English control what is today Paris and the regions, the northern France. You have the Bretagne there in France, which is Britain in French, right? Is a region that still exists today. So the English dominate that region. They were at a war for 100 years. This is the 100-Year War. And she had this vision that told her to go and fight to help free France. According to her, the vision was, she says that it was a vision of a saint or a god. So at 16, she goes there and goes fighting, disguised as a man, and helps France liberated itself from the domain of England. And in the end, when she was 19, she was captured by the French that were still allied with the English, and she was condemned as a witch and burned at stake when she was 19 years old. And she was declared a martyr and became one of the patrons of France. She's one of the 9 patron saints of France, along others like St. Louis, which we know and we talked a little bit last month, and also some others like Saint Denis, Saint Michel, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, and others. So she's a very important and is a popular figure in literature, in painting, in sculpture. There is a book by Leon Denis that talks about Joan d'Arc. It's a very beautiful, very interesting book. It hasn't been republished because the original translation was made by Arthur Conan Doyle, and we think it's a very good translation. Difficult to find, of course, but it's if you can find, it's worth reading. For those that can read in Portuguese, of course, you can find the work of or in French, you can find the original work from Leon Denis talking about Joan of Arc, and it's really a very, very beautiful book and very interesting work. Okay, so it's important to understand Joan of Arc. I don't know, Elmo, if you have any addition in terms of mediumship with that you something that I miss here on her.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. So she was trialed and retrialed, and in the end was condemned to death by fire. According to Spiritism, she is the reincarnation of Judas, the one that betrayed Jesus, and she was the one that she had to come back and go through this trial as this emissary of Christ in the work of the evolution and helping free France from because it was important for France to continue developing at their own path. Okay. Questions, comments here? Any additional?
I have one comment to make or a question.
Yes.
Then what do you call it? It's kind of difficult for me to see like the intervention of the spiritual world in wars here on Earth. Because
yes.
because that's when I read the classics from Greek Roman masterpieces. There were a lot of gods in that world were interfering in the wars, the Greek wars and the Roman wars. So we have now something like that similar with Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Like the highly evolved spirits are mingling with the war affairs of us here on Earth.
Yes.
Am I making sense, or is it clear what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Okay. And it's very important that we discuss and analyze this.
Thank you.
Do the superior spirits want us to go to war? Of course not. Now, the wars exist. It is caused by us inferior spirits. We are the ones that go to war. Now, once it exists, the spirits are trying to help us to end the war, always. So, again, we cannot really know exactly what she heard or saw through her mediumistic abilities. I'm sure the spirit hasn't told her to go to war, but what the spirit told and what she understood can be different things, right?
Definitely. I'm following you.
Yes. And spirits keep telling us things, and we have our own understandings of what spirits tell us. So a spirit that tell her go, and I don't know exactly in what words and in what sense, but your mission is to help France bring back freedom to France, and go tell the king this and that. And that's what she did. The fact that she went and participated in the war, is that the spirit telling her to go participate in the war? I don't know. but spirits will never, evolved spirits will never tell us to go fight.
Exactly.
They will
Okay.
tell us and help us, inspire us to work for a better world and to work to find means to help evolution to a better world. So it's what they tell us is ways of, like someone is telling me here, a way of non-violent conflict resolution. Yes, that's what they tell us, but what we understand and interpret and act on, it's our own personal individual choice, right? And actually, Elmo, I would like you to comment on this.
Yeah, because I do take a different approach. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I take a different approach to death. I think the divine superiority must use the tools available to them to help us. And the practice that we created for ourselves at that time was to resolve conflicts through the wars. They didn't have another means to. It's very nice to say non-violent resolution of conflicts. Yes, it is when there is a possibility of such a thing, not when we, living incarnate at the time, does not consider that as a possibility. So the only thing that the superior spirituality did to resolve conflicts was through the war. And this is a war that was already there for 100 years. How are we going to stop it? They have to have one side victorious or it will never stop. It's going to be 300, 400, 600 years of war. So again, you sacrifice, we do things that are very not nice, but for a noble objective that consequences are for the good, are for the progress of humankind.
Yeah.
So I think it's very naive to say, they could have a non-violent resolution of this, as we could, but we opted not to do it. We did consider that not to do it, and the superior spirituality had to use the tools available to help us to end this 100 years already conflict.
Got it. Yeah, exactly. Very good. Very good. So what you're saying is that at that point in time in history, actually humankind, we were lacking the mindfulness, the skill of logic to have
Of diplomacy.
diplomacy
Our
or have
diplomacy
conduct,
was the
etc. Yeah.
spot, was bellical.
Yeah, I got it. No, you understand? Is that we at that point in time we were lacking that skill? Period.
That's the reality of us at that
Yeah.
time.
The reality of us, of humankind. Yes. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Very good answer. Very good answer.
Yeah. Exactly. It's perfect. Thank you, Elmo. Just the visions that she had. She said that she had visions of Saint Michel, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, and they told her to drive out the English and take the Dauphin to Reims for his consecration. The Dauphin was the son of the king, and she was illiterate, and she told scribes what to write, and then she signed the letters with help of others. So she went to talk about her visions when she was 16. So and she was killed when she was burned at stake when she was 19. So you can see that it was a very short period of time, and how much of a difference and how much you can stay in history with such a small period of time. And she was born in the middle of nowhere in France, and her parents owned some land, small land, and they lived in a small village. And she was able to convince. Her first vision was at the age of 13, and she was at her father's garden, and she starts seeing having these visions, and she had these visions until 16, when she decided to report to the king, and convinced the king to listen to her. There are movies about that, of course, a lot of fiction, but there are good movies about Joan of Arc that is really worth. I have a question here on the private message: if we find wars in all existing realms. Well, let's just bring this to existing worlds, because there are the wars that we find in the spiritual world is psychological wars, but not physical wars, because we cannot destroy the eternal spirit. Now, in physical worlds, there is this question in the Spirit's book, and the Spirit says that war is a creation of ourselves here on Earth. They don't say that they do not exist in other worlds, but they will say that the other worlds have different means of solving their conflicts. So are we going to find wars in other worlds? That's me saying. I imagine that probably in some of them also, because it's difficult to believe amongst billions of different planets that Earth is the only one that we have wars. But do we have all wars in all of inferior, less evolved worlds? Then I would say no, we don't. There are other ways of solving conflicts that do not necessarily have to resort to wars. Okay. Okay. So we finished this chapter. We have only 10 minutes, so I'm going to leave the next chapter for next month, the Renaissance of the World, chapter 20, when we're going to talk a little bit more about the regenerative movements. We're going to enter into the religion issues that we had at the Renaissance with the Protestantism. We're going to talk about Martin Luther. We're going to talk about Calvin, which is very relevant to this country here, Erasmus, and the reasons, and according to Emmanuel, what the reasons and the consequences of all these separatist movements that happened at that time. Okay. Any other comments here? Still have time if someone wants to ask some questions or have any comments. Otherwise, we are going to end. So next Sunday, we are going to have our second part of the lecture, Mediumship of Intelligent Effects, that me and Elmo started couple of months ago in November. We are going to finish next Sunday, the second part. Again, it's a lecture, but it's always also a conversation about mediumship. So mediumship of intelligent effects that we're going to study next Sunday, which is the fourth Sunday of the month. And then in the fifth and last Sunday of the month, we will have our Q&A session, okay?
Johnny.
Yes.
Sorry, a late question. Do you have any reference for the fact that Joanna d'Arc is a reincarnation of
Judas? I think it is in this book of Leon Denis, but I'm not sure. Elmo, you remember where you can find this?
I think it's also mentioned on one of Brother X's books.
Oh, yes. Humberto de Campos, Brother X, one of his books. Yeah. I don't know. Yes, I think it's mentioned somewhere there.
One.
Maybe Boa Nova, which is the most famous one. But, please look for it, Luis, and find for us. It is mentioned somewhere. Yes. All right. Elmo, can you do our final prayer?
Sure. As we come to the end of this meeting, With our hearts and minds filled with happiness for this opportunity, we give thanks to God our Father, our beloved Master Jesus Christ, to the superior spirits to help us, to illuminate the way that leads to our happiness, to peace with our own conscience, to the good spirits to help us to review our past, to understand our present, and to prepare ourselves for a much better future. We ask to be protected and guided throughout the week, to help us to be vigilant with our sentiments, with our thoughts, to produce good words and good action. May we be granted with good health and use it to do good work. May we be able to be back here next week to continue to evolve, to continue to progress. And we ask permission to close this meeting. So be it.